Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to World this morning. I am Hajra Sati, your host. So I'm very honored, to be that he has graced us with his presence here in the studio, and he happens to be Dr. Abdulgafoor Bachani Saab. He is also director at Johns Hopkins University. He is the heading the International Injury Research Unit. And not just that, but he's also the alumni of that university, and I'm really, very impressed by his credentials because, Pakistanis are always making us proud. So, assalamu alaikum, sir, and thank you so much, for coming to our show.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you for having me on this show.
PTV World. It's great to have you. Thank you very much for taking time out. So, jumping straight into the discussion, so the area of the work that you are in, would you like to elaborate for our viewers a little in detail what does this rehabilitation means and how effective it happens to be for any certain
and why do we need to talk about it in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So no, thanks again for having me. Just by way of introduction, as you said, my name is Abdul Bachani. I am based at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm an associate professor there in international health. And I direct this center that's focused on injuries, disability, and rehabilitation. When we talk about rehabilitation, it's important to understand that rehabilitation is a set of services within the spectrum of health services that are geared to enhance functioning, to restore functioning of individuals to levels at which we expect individuals to function, to be able to be productive members of society, to be able to live a healthy life and participate in society, participate in social events, take care of their families, participate in other family activities, as well as economically productive activities. And so that's the angle through which we approach rehabilitation. And why rehabilitation is important, why are we talking about it at this point in time is, as we've gotten better in reducing mortality around the world, people are living longer. And non-communicable diseases, chronic conditions are becoming more prominent. People are living longer with consequences of conditions. There's an increase in injuries, there's an increase in conflict around the world. And so naturally there's a need for us to focus on enabling people to lead a healthy life that's more productive.
And with ease.
And with ease.
Exactly, because of the consequences of certain conditions that you've just mentioned, the difficulties for them are increased many-fold. So the kind of services that you people are giving is basically focused on giving them an ease for the rest of their lives.
Right, and I really wanted to ask you, sir, since by the virtue of your office, you are influencing such a good change, in our society too, and especially in America too. So why do people often overlook the rehabilitation, and why is it even important to talk about it?
Is it even overlooked?
So yes,
what are the findings?
It's great. It's a great question, and it is indeed overlooked. Rehabilitation has always been the sort of a stepchild when it comes to health services within the health system. We've almost always, traditionally, by virtue of the needs, focused on reducing infectious diseases, reducing mortality, etc. And it's all good. We've reduced the number of people who are dying of conditions that are preventable. But we also need to now focus on making sure people are leading healthy, productive lives. And that's where functioning comes in. Rehabilitation services have often been standalone services, mostly available in large urban settings, in specialized hospitals. But they don't have to be that way. Most of the people who need rehabilitation are in the community. They don't have access to these services in the community. And what we're trying to do with the Learning, Acting, and Building for Rehabilitation in Health Systems project that's funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development is to try and see how we can integrate rehabilitation services as core services within the health system and bring them closer to where people are who need them.
Right.
So is it specifically for a certain community of people or a certain people who have got certain conditions, or is it across the board?
It's across the board. When we talk about rehabilitation, we're talking about rehabilitation services across the board. What we will be doing with this project is we're working with key stakeholders within government and outside government as well, because there's a role for the private sector here, and there's a role for the government. There's government services, there's a health system here, and we need to see how we can better integrate rehabilitation as key pieces or parts of the health system as other services are. So vaccinations, immunizations, etc., are core services, maternal and child health.
Right.
Embed rehabilitation services in there so that in addition to all those, we are working on understanding what the needs are of individuals and provide those services.
Right. So, sir, when it comes to the public health sector, it's not that much evolved as it is in the, America or in the West in general, right? So a lot of, my friends, who were studying with me, especially when it comes to the medical, they wanted to be an MBBS doctor, right? I do feel that the rehabilitation sector is somewhat neglected when it comes to the medical services in Pakistan.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say? Do you see a good future when it comes to the rehabilitation services in Pakistan for the medical students?
So again, it's partly cultural,
right?
And it's partly
right.
a function of the way the system is organized,
right?
So when I mean cultural, in our culture, you either become a doctor or an engineer,
right?
And that's what's prioritized,
so that's
right?
Perhaps because of the economic dividends at the
Because
end
of the economic dividends.
So
at the end.
what about this particular field?
Right. And so what we need to do is we need to develop this as a profession. We need to work on all these allied health professions and make sure they get as much prominence as well. When it comes to rehabilitation professions, there are a lot of programs that train physical therapists, occupational therapists, etc. There's a lot of people who do graduate from these schools, but unfortunately aren't able to find jobs. The other thing is there's not enough regulation when it comes to it. Anyone can claim I'm a physiotherapist and perform services. Unfortunately, doing more harm than good in those cases.
The quack doctor especially,
yeah, and so working on a system, and there's several bills in the provincial assemblies right now, I believe in 2 or 3 provincial assemblies that are seeking to establish some accreditation mechanism where physical therapists, occupational therapists are licensed and regulated to provide some more prominence to that profession, to basically provide a pathway towards ensuring quality of services that are provided, etc. And then also we need to work on, when we talk about a systems level change, we need to work at the level of the system and ensure that when people are graduating from these programs, we have a pathway for them to be economically productive, to contribute to society.
That's true.
Many of our provinces here have positions within the public health system for physical therapists, etc., but those are never recruited.
Right.
They're never announced, and recruitment doesn't happen. There's funding allocated to it.
Right.
So we want to see how we can work with the system to make sure that people can be employed in these positions.
Dr. Bachani, there are 2 different things that you just mentioned. If I connect to both of those things, it gives us a very interesting scenario when we talk about culture, especially in the far-flung areas here in Pakistan.
Right.
And then you talk about quacks. Now, in far-flung areas, there are certain practitioners whom the people believe in very much, and they've been serving people of that particular area for years and years.
Right.
So they've got a certain belief in them. So in order to target those people in far-flung areas who've got the belief in a certain quack who's been practicing for years and years, and he's been giving remedies to people. So is there any sort of a scenario that your organization could take those practitioners on board and train them properly?
And also, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you, but when it comes to, especially the US aid and especially, the Western funded, the organization, the NGOs that are working here, there's certain, stigma attached to them. There's a trust deficit, especially when it comes to the local communities. So it's a really, hard job convincing people out there, that, we're actually working for your betterment, for your good. How do you, plan to address this sort of stigma to, and that to, Jawad's question?
Yeah, so there's 2 aspects of it, right? We've talked about the supply side. We need to talk about the demand side as well. We need to talk about, people needing to understand that rehabilitation services are beneficial to them. Usually, we don't end up going to seek these services unless it's really bad,
right?
Unless in extreme cases. But when we seek these services, when we understand the need for these services and seek them, they're eventually beneficial to us. So we will need to work with the communities. We will need to work to change those patterns of thinking and those practices that have been happening for a long time now. it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a process. There needs to be a paradigm shift that happens both at the supply level and the demand level as well. So we need to work on both ends. We need to make sure we're educating the public that these are services that are important for you, they'll help you, and they're available, that we know they're available. If you go to the health center, there are people who will be able to help identify your needs and be able to meet your needs.
So how much are the people at the top level, when your organization works over here in Pakistan, are receptive of this idea in particular?
So we're in a really good time when it comes to rehabilitation and the things that we're talking about, because there's a global movement as well. You know, the Rehabilitation 2030 movement that's championed by the WHO, that's led by the WHO, the World Health Organization, who are developing tools, frameworks, and working with country governments to be able to translate them into, contextually translate them to be implemented in country. When it comes to Pakistan, Pakistan has been one of the leaders in this area. The government of Pakistan sponsored the World Health Assembly resolution on assistive technologies a couple of years ago. So we are getting traction at higher levels and mid levels and lower levels. What we need to do is just bring everyone together, work on looking at how we can improve the system, how we can integrate these services more centrally within the system.
And sir, when it comes, because you are also associated with academia, you are the also the director of the Johns Hopkins University, and especially when it comes to the International Injury Research Unit, right? So you are more aware with the academic trends, which are prevalent in this field. So would you like to shed some lights when it comes to the academic trends on the rehabilitation?
Would you mind elaborating on that?
Okay. So basically, you're an academic, right? You're a professor, and you're more aware with what are the academic trends when it comes to that. What are the medical trends? The new trends which are in this field. So, do you want to elaborate on that when it comes to the rehabilitation?
Yeah. So when it comes to rehabilitation, as I said earlier, because of the change in the evolving patterns of disease and conditions around the world, as we're moving towards reducing infectious diseases, reducing mortality, people are living longer. There's increased motorization happening in many of our countries. There's a lot of motorcycles coming in many of our countries. There's a lot more injuries, road traffic injuries happening. People will need rehabilitation. There's a lot more people who are living towards older ages in life, and they need different kinds of rehabilitation. There's kids who are engaged in different activities. They have falls, other injuries. They need different kinds of rehabilitation. So what we need to look at is across the spectrum, the continuum of care across the spectrum, taking a life course approach, knowing full well that the rehabilitation that a child needs will be different from rehabilitation that an adolescent needs to a young adult, to an older adult, and make sure that we're planning our services so that we're able to meet all these needs.
Right. So what is the last message that you would like to give to our audience, especially when it comes to the rehabilitation trends? So this is your camera, please go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you again for having me here. And what I would like to say is that when it comes to rehabilitation services are important. They're able to help us improve our functioning, live a more productive life, both economically and socially productive as well. And one of the things that we're going to be working with local stakeholders here as part of this USAID funded activity, that's learning, acting, and building for rehabilitation in health systems, is to see how we can better integrate rehabilitation services within health systems and make them more available at all levels of care, so that anyone who needs rehabilitation services has access to them and can benefit from them.
Right, wonderful. Thank you so much, for saying that. And as I was talking to his team behind the camera, and they were telling me about that rehabilitation is not just about going there and getting done with just one walk in there. It's a continuous process. You have to go there, you have to get the follow-ups, and this is how you are going to create a positive impact on your health, on your body, and on your the disease which you're trying to cure. And speaking of impact, Jawad, I'm sorry I'm cutting you. So impact is not just created by the public health, it's also the media industry that is creating a lot of impact on us, on our psyche. And it's the social media, which is the new normal, which is the new media that is also creating a lot of impact on us. So after, yes.
One very important thing, the people should start believing in the scientific methods and the scientific remedies rather than going to the quacks and becoming disabled or specially abled for the rest of their lives.
Or believing in the superstitions when it comes to that, right? So after a short break, we will be right back and we will be discussing about, the media industry and how does it impact us.